What up, Mini family? In this mystery box, I have what is possibly the best merger of Warhammer and Lego that I've ever personally seen. This set of modular ruined buildings from today's sponsor, Snot Goblin Gaming, is normally intended for competitive Warhammer 40k, allowing you to configure a seemingly endless variety of buildings that match the layout in the rules. Today we're going to see if we can stretch it to work for Age of Sigmar, a popular fantasy setting because my lonely Soulblight army needs some thematic terrain. But we're also going to test this Lego claim.
This is a lot of options. I'm gonna sit here for a little bit and just have a bit of a play to figure out what kinds of combinations we can get. There are definitely instructions online for how to assemble certain configurations of buildings, but I wanna just take a stab at it first. Let's see how much like Lego this stuff really is.
I created 3 different buildings that went from small to large. The largest of the 3 buildings I fully enclosed and built up to 3 tiers high by the end. The Lego claim is pretty accurate, but something I said earlier isn't. The amount of pieces you have available to you is actually not that many. I immediately became familiar with what each piece could do, and I'm impressed by how far you can go with little more than 15 unique parts. The pieces pressure fit together super well, and I can tell they worked hard on getting the fitment right, but there are some limitations with this first set. For example, you can't just have one wall in height without there being visible connectors. The current system intends for you to build it up to at least this height if you want to hide them. Having a collapsed wall that is angled results in showing more of the connecting pieces, which you can kind of hide by using this small piece or having an overhang like this. First of all, shout out to Snot Goblin Gaming, the creator of this kit, for allowing me to critique the parts in a sponsored video. Not all brands are okay with that. Secondly, it's completely feasible that at some point in the future, there will be more parts that expand the customization options of this kit. Lego had to start somewhere, and I assume the same is true here. And in fact, that time is now. With the new Kickstarter campaign, a couple of the problems I just mentioned are solved with a second wave of new additions to the set, allowing for more customization. Finally, this is a creative hobby, and I'm sure we can solve some of these small problems with some creative solutions. All right, and for the video, we're gonna work on this medium-sized structure. But before we paint, we're gonna do a few bits of conversion to make it seem more like a Soulblight Gravelord structure, but also to kind of hide some of these problems that I mentioned earlier with these kits and to make them a little bit more unique. First things first though, I'm going to seal my fate with some plastic glue. I understand that one of the values of the kit is the ability to take it apart later on, but I know myself and I'm never gonna do that. And also I really like the idea of making it a little bit more custom. And I think in order to do that, I'm gonna need to mess with that plug and play ability anyways. So might as well just glue it all together just to make sure nothing goes loose over time. For this corner of my ruined building, I'm actually going to remove one of the upper level parts just to get a bit of diversity in the height. And then I will clip off the connector pieces and clean them up so that you'll never know they were there. Also, with this thing fully intact, I'm going to look for mold lines to remove them. I could have removed all the mold lines from every single individual piece, but I kind of felt that a lot of those mold lines would have been covered up by various joining pieces, and indeed they are. The pillars that connect the various wall panels do hide a ton of crimes, and so instead of wasting time removing mold lines that'll never be seen, I'll just do it after the whole model is assembled. Some of the floor tiles have visible gaps in case you want to extend them further, but in my case, I won't be needing them, so for now, I'll backfill them with some styrene. To make my terrain look more like undead terrain, I'm going to employ the use of some leftover bits. Come on! Release! With a healthy amount of undead and fantasy bits at my disposal, I began to convert this ruined building. Stick a bone altar here, a severed arm there, you know the drill. The aesthetic of these ruined buildings is definitely gothic, like the setting of Warhammer 40k, but it doesn't lean into sci-fi too hard. There aren't power cables and energy packs littered about. The walls are double-sided and fairly detailed, so you can choose which face you want pointing out and more visible, and I actually like the side with the skulls and the swords. Seems fitting for my undead minions. With all the major elements in place, I started to smash up some scale model resin bricks that I littered onto the terrain. There are bricks sculpted into the walls, so it makes sense to see a few of these sprinkled around. I also put a lot of dirt down where it made sense, like in the corners and between cracks in the floor tiles. Lastly, I placed some skulls around the building because
It is Warhammer after all. With everything in the right spot, I sealed my fate with some super glue thin. My favorite glue for instantly sticking down small terrain features like this, which reminds me, to hide the connector piece on my angled collapsed wall, I just shoved some cork into the gaps and glued more dirt onto it, and it looks like a chunk of broken wall. Easy. I took the building outside to prime in black with a can of aerosol and began painting with my first base coat of dark blue. I'm going to be building up a nice cold zenithal base coat to match the blues from my Soulblight army. While I do enjoy working on terrain, I find I never have time for it, which results in often playing games with unpainted terrain. Just take a look at my gaming VODs if you want proof of this sad fact. But there's a solution to this issue. On November 5th, Snot Goblin Gaming is launching a Kickstarter campaign for the set of terrain you're seeing me work on in bare plastic, but also pre-painted. The paint jobs are surprisingly good, but more importantly, they're incredibly durable. I'm literally scratching this with my thumbnail and no paint is coming off. There are 6 total varieties of painted options, from jungle ruins to dusty Martian worlds. And like I mentioned previously, there are also more pieces now that work with the existing kit to expand its functionality. Also, if by the end of the video you like the paint scheme for this building that I'm working on, you can actually pick up a pre-painted set in that same paint job, a Miniac version if you will. Down in the description is a link to a campaign where you can pick from a variety of modular sets, whether it's a full table of terrain, half a table, and so on. After the campaign is over, you'll be able to pick which pre-painted scheme you want inside of BackerKit, a pledge managing software. And with the coupon code MOIST, you can get 20 bucks off a full set of my Miniac scheme. With my building starting off strong, I continue with some dry brushing. I started with a gray color that ended up not really doing anything, and so I switched to a pure white, which did show up a lot better. It's nice to bring out all of those tile edges and rocky sculpture. Lastly, I did one final highlight with pure white in my airbrush. I figured that if I did this last layer after the dry brushing, I could knock back any bad results I got with that previous step. To get some more texture on the stone, I turned the PSI of my airbrush way down with the white paint still in there, which caused a lot of speckling and droplets to occur, adding some more nice texture. Time to bust out the paintbrush. I'll start by using some Vallejo Express paint to give the building a splash of red, which is another important color in my Soulblight scheme. I wasn't too careful with this step. Terrain is a pretty forgiving canvas to work on as far as making mistakes go, which is why it's so refreshing to paint sometimes. It's kind of like the base of your models, but just 20 times bigger. With the initial red base coat down, I add in some variety with both a dark brown and also a salmon colored brick. I then busted out a cream color to paint the exposed plaster, or whatever the suitable medieval version would be. While I had this paint out, I also base coated all the various bone parts I glued to the building. Then with some tan color enamel, I washed the bricks, and when it dries, it looks like a perfect brick grout. This wash wouldn't have covered the large flat areas, which is why we started off with a base coat, but it nicely fills in all those cracks with ease. With a little cleanup with mineral spirits and a Mako sponge, we're left with a very nice and thin grout line. I washed the closed windows with another express paint that shows up in my Soulblight scheme a lot, Black Lotus, a nice dark blue color, and then began to paint the various accent pieces in a sickly gold. For the dirt I glued down, a wash of a dark brown enamel paint worked well. I'm a big fan of how dusty enamel washes look when they're dry. And they're not fully opaque either, so it'll look darker in the cracks and lighter on the tops of the tiny bumps and ridges, just like a normal wash does as well. This color was also used to wash the various skulls and bone detail. I also splattered some of this brown color onto the walls and floor tiles, which won't really matter after this next step. Time to really transform this piece. With a blue enamel wash, I doused basically the whole building. On the floor tiles, I was a little bit more selective where the wash went, but on the walls, I kind of just splashed it all over. Because the paint I've applied to the model so far has a pretty matte finish, this enamel paint will stick around quite a bit. The matte paint has a micro texture that allows the wash to get stuck in all the microscopic nooks and crannies. After some drying time, I used more Mako sponges and a lot of mineral spirits to begin to clean up some of the wash on the flat surfaces. Admittedly, I went a little too crazy with the enamel wash, tinting the whole building a light blue. With a sponge and a lighter desaturated color, I start to sponge on a more neutral tone to knock back some of that blue, but also to add more rocky texture. Next up, I paint some of the remaining details like the sewer grates and the door handles in silver. I probably should have done this before I did the all-over enamel wash, but we're here now. Next up, I applied some dirty down moss into some of the murkier corners of the building to emulate moss. Sometimes this stuff dries matte and lime green and it looks amazing. And other times it just stays dark green and glossy, which looks significantly worse. Yes, I know about shaking the product and heating it up and all those tricks, but despite that, it still feels very hit or miss. Luckily for me, the lighter colored walls look really nice with streaking green color anyway, so it doesn't really matter. For the bone altar, I washed the pages of the book in a sepia color, followed up by a streaky highlight and some scribbly letters. I used contrast black for this as it's nice and thin, but still opaque, which is a great combo for doing this kind of thing. For the torch, I wanted to try something. I base coated the flames in teal, the spot color for my Soul Blight army, and then mixed up a wash with acrylic white ink. I then applied it all over the flames. You can do this sort of thing with an oil wash as well, but I didn't want to wait around for an oil wash to dry. When the acrylic wash had dried, I then applied highly diluted turquoise ink. My hope was that the light-colored cracks would appear brighter than the turquoise flames, but admittedly, the white ink kind of disappeared instantly. I probably should have used a darker base coat if I wanted the effect that I was after, but now I know. To finish off the building, I stuck down some tufts of various lengths and sizes. I really wanted this building to feel ruined and like nature was taking over. I also glued on some clump foliage near the areas I applied that dirty down moss to reinforce the feeling of moss, and that completed the building. I'm pretty happy with this terrain solution. I appreciate the level of customization the pieces afford you. You can create whatever ruined Gothic building you pretty much want, and then you can customize it to your heart's content like me in this video, or you can skip that and the parts will remain modular, which allows them to pack away much more easily. My goal of creating a more fantasy setting that matches the vibe of my Soul Blight wasn't really difficult, and I'm happy to start down the road of having a fully themed set of terrain for my skeletons and vampires. If you're interested in picking up this terrain, you can find a link in my description to a Kickstarter campaign live on November 5th. If you liked seeing me working on terrain, I'll have another video linked at the end of this one that I think you'll enjoy. If you like the channel and you want to support it, there are a number of ways you can do that, all things linked down in the description below. Most notably, a Patreon campaign where I do weekly posts about what's going on behind the scenes. It gets you access to my Discord server so I can chat about miniature painting any day of the week. It also gets you access to early releases of the Miniac videos. And also it gets you access to director's cuts where I will show you all the painting footage I captured for a given video and give you my stream of conscious thoughts on a paint job. It's great for extra detail where parts of the paint job that are smaller and less important are skipped over. Alternatively, you can check out my web store, Miniac.co, where I sell a bunch of stuff like cutting mats, brush boxes, models, and merch for the web store. Unfortunately, not this sexy Vince t-shirt. This is a one-off just for me, baby. That's gonna do it for this video, guys. Subscribe or die! But most importantly, don't forget to paint my Miniac!